as healthy Christians is the habit of willing God's will. Two verses that I want to focus on. One comes from the Lord's Prayer. Jesus teaches us to pray to the Father, "Your kingdom come." Come on. "Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And then Jesus' prayer. Now notice that's couched in a prayer. And this is couched in a prayer, which seems to me to mean that willing God's will is a matter of prayer. We need help knowing it and willing it. Remember, Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane where he was betrayed, and he's praying. And what does he pray? "Father, if it be possible, let this cup of suffering pass, but not my will, but yours be done." Jesus showed us that to be a child of God is to will the will of the Father. Which means it doesn't just happen. We have to be intentional about it, deliberate about it. We have to think about it. We have been given freedom to will one way of living, another way, one way of acting, and another way, one way of speaking, and another way. The Great Commandment, when I came, this church described itself as a Great Commandment church, and I loved it. I love that idea of willing what the Great Commandment expresses: to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. But you've got to will it. You've got to intend it. It doesn't just happen like homework or football practice or basketball practice or learning how to ride a bike or learning. Being a Christian doesn't just happen. We have to be intentional about it. We have to will God's will for God's will to be done on earth as in heaven. Now, why? Why do we have to work at it? Be mindful of it. Why doesn't it just happen? It doesn't just happen because even though we believe that Jesus has freed us from the power of sin and death, we're free not to be determined, not to be controlled by it. It still is a part of what's holding on to us in our kind of inner being. We're not completely, we Christians call it sanctification. It's becoming holy, becoming godly, becoming Christ-like. It's being completely free to be a child of God. We know that we're not there yet. And so we contend with the leftover residual strength of those unholy spirits that still have us under their influence. And so we have this tug of war. At least I do, inside me. This tug of war where those parts of me still under the influence of sin and under the influence of Holy Spirits make me face a choice. I have to will God's will rather than the will, the Scripture calls it the will of sin, the will of the flesh. Sometimes we use language like It's not yet our second nature. Well, I think we Christians believe, no, it's our first nature. We are reborn to the image of God we've been created in. That's our first nature. I would want to say that our second nature is our nature under sin. And what Jesus makes possible through the Holy Spirit and God's grace is that we return to our first nature where the image of God is fully alive in us. Have you ever seen someone live their life under the first nature, under love, where it seems like they don't have to will, it just happens, that love that is self-denying, self-sacrificing? I saw it a week ago when Karen and I visited Shelby and Michelle and Dickie Glisson. Michelle, Shelby's mother, Shelby's had a lung transplant, if you don't know the family situation, a second one. Counting the time prior to her waiting for the transplant when she was getting so sick, so very, very sick. And then the transplant, and now the post. Michelle has spent, I think she was saying, over 70, almost 80 straight days with Shelby, because Shelby doesn't want her out of her sight. As Shelby says, I can't even go to the bathroom. She has completely given her life to her daughter because it really has been a matter of life and death. But she does it. And I got the feeling that it's that mother's love that doesn't have to think about it, doesn't have to will it. It is coming naturally. But for most of us, we have to think about it and will it and be conscious of it, because that power of sin, that selfishness that is in all of us, still has us in its grips enough to where love doesn't just happen. I'm going to share with you, I know you all think I'm perfect. Obviously, a lot of you don't. 4 areas. I said, okay, I'm going to ask the congregation to be mindful of their own willing. Where am I having to will, having to exert consciousness and intentionality in order to not choose the sin that still I have to contend with, that still creates that tug of war? God's will, the will of sin, the will of the flesh, the will of evil, the will. I have to almost literally bite my tongue sometimes to keep from saying what is not God's will for me to say. Do you have to bite your tongue? Do you find yourself, especially when you're on autopilot or when you're tired or you're stressed or you're preoccupied or you're angry or whatever the emotion is, you find yourself on the verge of saying words that you know aren't loving? I have to confess that most of the time I don't bite my tongue. I still have it. And I do say words that I later regret and have to apologize for. But that's one of those places where I have to will God's will so that the tongue doesn't do harm, doesn't do damage, because words, the same power of words that created all that is, God spoke, The Word that became flesh and dwelt among us, those same words can tear down, can do harm that can last a lifetime in some cases, depending on who says them and when they're said. I have to will not to be selfish, because I grew up in a home I didn't want for much. I was aware that others had more than we had, but I remember the feeling of living from paycheck to paycheck, of knowing that my father at times worked 3 jobs and my mother worked. And I remember their fighting over money. And so I grew up with, in my being, in my soul, in my body, a sense of financial insecurity. And so I have to will to be generous. I have to will to not be overcome by the thought, if you give it away, you're going to end up regretting it because you're going to need it later. And so generosity doesn't come naturally for me. I have to will it. I have to work at it. I have to trust in God's generosity so that I can be generous too. I was kind of joking, but not so much when I was referring to being perfect. I grew up being formed by the notion that I could be perfect, that I should be perfect, that I had to be perfect, and so I'm a perfectionist. And perfectionism is a curse. Perfectionism means I'm more critical of myself than you all could ever be. But when you are, and because I'm not perfect, you have a right to be, when you are, it just sends my perfectionism crazy. It just goes to the extreme, takes over. But what I find is that those of us who are so self-critical usually tend to be critical of other people in the same, sometimes cruel ways. And so I have to will tolerance. I have to will mercy. I have to will forgiveness. I have to will not applying my unrealistic and sinful yardstick that I use often on myself on other people as well, because what I think other people should be doing and how other people should be living and acting is in my head. It's my will. It's not God's will. And so I have to will God's will. Another area that I've had to be willful about is I'm basically, by nature, what comes natural? An introvert. I have had to will to be an extrovert. I know you think that, golly, how could anyone be a pastor and not be an extrovert? There was a book written a couple of years ago that I wish I had written first. The title was, Can Pastors Be Introverts? I said, I know what's in that book without even reading it. I've had to will God's will, which is I know I represent. I'm the shepherd. I represent the good shepherd, and the good shepherd cares for everyone. And so I have had to learn to will to be an extrovert. And you all can decide whether or not I've succeeded at that. But it hasn't come naturally. So, what are you willing? What tug-of-wars are going on inside you between what you know God's will is revealed in Jesus, and the will that is still under what we Christians call the power of sin? Seems to me we've got to know ourselves well enough against the backdrop of who Jesus shows us, what Jesus shows us is the will of God, and then to live in that discrepancy and do what Jesus did, and that is pray to the Father for help. Because we believe that our goal is sanctification, to become holy as Jesus reveals holiness to us. Now, this applies to individuals, but it also applies to the community, to us. Not just I, me, and not just you, you, but to us. This is a, quote, willing community. Willing in all the ways that word can be used. Willing, as I'm using it this morning, intentional to be loving, but also willing in terms of desiring to live that way together. And I want to thank you for all the ways you will God's will, trust it, obey it, do it. If you've got one of the time and talent surveys in your order of worship this morning, you can follow it. But I'm going to go down some of the many ways you all will God's will and do it. It's what makes this church special. You teach Sunday school, all levels. You work in Vacation Bible School. You work with the Children's Sunlight Choir. You sing in the Children's Sunlight Choir. Through the Rainbow Ministry, you provide care for children and youth who are going through the experience of loss. You chaperone youth trips. You serve as mentors to children and youth. You fix youth snack suppers. You prepare and serve Holy Communion. You sing in the choir. Play handbells, an instrument. Serve as a crucifer or an acolyte. One of the things I really think was of God was the insight that we believe that children and youth are called by Jesus to serve. And so there's a panel on that survey of time and talent that apply to children and to youth, because they're servant leaders too. You serve on a ministry team or council. You greet persons on Sunday morning. You usher. You provide fellowship opportunities for us to gather and eat and have fun. You make outings possible. You take flowers to homebound members. You knit prayer shawls and baby blankets. As part of Marion's ministry, you care for persons who are grieving, alone, sick, distressed. You pray for those you don't know as well as those you do. You decorate our worship space for the various high seasons, holy seasons of the year. You build houses with Habitat for Humanity. You stay overnight and fix meals for the homeless during the winter. You buy Christmas gifts for young and old. You read to children during the summer through Project Transformation. You take baskets to hospital personnel on Thanksgiving. You provide leadership for one of the church's institutional groups, staff, parish, committee, trustees, finance, endowment, church council, lay leadership. You serve as a host or hostess on Sunday morning out in the narthex or during the week in the Family Life Center. You don't just serve within this community, but the larger community on many of the service agencies that enhance the quality of life. Brooks House, Community Help Center, Empty Bowls, the Chamber of Commerce, Next Step Resource, civic clubs, Joseph Storehouse. You participate in groups that learn together, care for one another, and reach out to those in need. Sunday school, Bible studies, United Methodist Women, United Methodist Men, United Methodist Youth Fellowship, Golden Agers. You write notes of encouragement. You take persons where they need to go when they need transportation. You reach out and touch persons who need someone to care for them. And I know because every so often I hear little birds have a way of communicating to your pastors what you think we don't know. And that is, I know that you all do what no one knows about, because every so often I do hear about it and know about it. And you do it all because you have willed to will God's will. And as the old hymn says, to trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Because love doesn't just happen. Christian community doesn't just happen. It happens because you have chosen to will God's will and to do it. And I thank God for you.